Nelson and Winnie Mandela were the most celebrated political couple in South Africa. Hailed as the mother of the nation, she kept the name of her husband alive during his 27 long years in prison. On the day of his release in 1990, they walked hand in hand as a symbol of victory. But behind the smiles, cracks were forming. Surprisingly, while Nelson Mandela forgave those who locked him away for nearly 3 decades, he could not forgive his ex-wife Winnie. But why? What betrayal could have wound him deeper than apartheid itself? In this edition of Hispo Media, I reveal how Nelson Mandela met Winnie Mandela, their love story that inspired millions of people across the world, and the betrayal that tore it apart. Welcome to this edition of Hispo Media. My name is Gabriel Adidia. But before we return to the story, let me thank you for your support and also encourage you to take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you remain tuned to the history of Nigeria and the rest of the African continent. Thank you. Nelson Mandela met Nomzamo Winifred Madikizela in 1957 at a bus station in Soweto. Winnie was a 22-year-old social worker born into the family of Columbus and Gertrude in the village of Umboingwena in what is now the Eastern Cape province of South Africa. On this fateful hour, she was standing at a bus station in Soweto when Nelson Mandela first saw her and charmed her. He secured a lunch date the following week. Winnie was young, beautiful, and politically conscious, a social worker who understood the suffering of black South Africans under the apartheid regime. At this time, Mandela was already a rising lawyer and political activist, 39 years old, charismatic, but married with 3 children. Within a year after meeting at the bus station, Mandela divorced his first wife, Evelyn Mays, and married Winnie in 1958. Their union was never ordinary. From the beginning, Nelson Mandela was already deeply entrenched in the African National Congress (ANC) plotting strategies of resistance. Meanwhile, their marriage was tested almost immediately because in 1962, Nelson Mandela was arrested, and on June 12, 1964, he was sentenced to life imprisonment during the Rivonia trial. Winnie was left to raise their daughters, Zenani and Zinzi, solely on her own. For the next 27 years, Mandela remained in prison, and Winnie became his very active and vocal voice on the outside. She endured solitary confinement, repeated arrest, harassment, and banishment to the remote area of Brandfort. Consequently, Winnie became a global symbol of resistance, speaking boldly when Mandela's voice was silenced. The entire world saw her as the embodiment of loyalty, courage, and defiance, and to many South Africans, she was the mother of the nation. But inside prison, Mandela's image of his wife froze in time. He remembered her as a young, spirited woman he had married, and he dreamed of returning to that love one day. But what he didn't see was the transformation that years of isolation, trauma, and politics had carved into his wife. On February 11, 1990, Nelson Mandela was released from prison following domestic and international pressure on apartheid regime in South Africa. His release was celebrated as a miracle and a symbol of victory. The world expected the couple's love story to continue where it had left off. However, privately, it was a reunion of strangers. Mandela later wrote with striking honesty, and I quote, "I came home to a house that has changed. I was a man who had left his wife. She had married a man who became a myth, and when the myth returned, he proved to be just a man." The myth weighed heavily on Winnie too. For decades, she carried the Mandela's name, embodying his struggle. But now, Mandela's release shifted the spotlight. He was once again the center, the leader, the negotiator with the apartheid regime. Winnie, who had built her own radical identity, now struggled to fit into his new measured reconciliatory world, and the marriage had begun to unravel. Meanwhile, the deepest wound came from betrayal, not political betrayal, but personal betrayal. During Mandela's long imprisonment, Winnie Mandela had become romantically involved with Dali Mpofu, a young ambitious ANC lawyer, nearly 30 years younger than her. Their love affair became public after a deeply personal letter from Winnie to Mpofu leaked, detailing both intimate emotions and financial entanglements. The letter, dated 17th of March and signed "It is me," revealed how Mrs. Mandela's relationship with Dali Mpofu, who at 30 was about half her age, helped to wreck her marriage to Nelson Mandela. It discloses that at one point, Mr. Mandela, whom she calls by his family name Tata, refused to speak to her for 5 months because of the affair. The letter was authenticated using a copy of her handwriting. So, for a man whose very life has been defined by discipline, sacrifice, and loyalty to the cause, this humiliation cut deeper than prison chains. His close friends recall that Nelson Mandela refused to speak to Winnie for months after the scandal broke. It was not merely about infidelity, it was about trust, dignity, and betrayal in front of a watching world. This was the first reason why Nelson Mandela could never forgive his ex-wife Winnie. But before we get to the next important reason, one question continued to stare us in the face directly. And that is, how did the secret letter manage to leak to the public? Well, Paulo Jordan, the information chief for the ANC, suggested that the letter may have been intercepted and leaked by government intelligence officials. He also believed that Mrs. Mandela had other numerous enemies even within the ANC who could have leaked the letter. But the family fractures went beyond the hearth. While Nelson Mandela was locked away, Winnie had become a controversial figure in the late 1980s. In 1986, she established the Mandela United Football Club, MUFC. Ostensibly, this was a group of young men who provided her with protection in Soweto, but disguised as a football club. In reality, however, the MUFC became a violent gang. They were implicated in assault, kidnappings, and even murders. Winnie herself was accused of endorsing brutal methods. One of the most important cases that hung on her neck was the murder of 14-year-old activist Tompi Sope on January 1, 1989. He was accused by Winnie's bodyguards of being a police informant and was kidnapped, beaten, and later found dead. In 1991, Winnie was convicted of kidnapping and being an accessory to assault. However, the murder charge was not proven, and even at this point, Nelson Mandela offered a defense for his wife. Meanwhile, at a rally in Johannesburg, Winnie Mandela was quoted as saying, "With our boxes of matches and our necklaces, we will liberate this country." Her comment, which seemed to endorse the gruesome act of putting rubber tire around suspected collaborators' neck, dosing them with petrol, and burning them alive, was condemned across the world. During the Truth and Reconciliation Commission hearings in South Africa, Archbishop Desmond Tutu famously begged Winnie to apologize for the bloodshed. She offered only partial words, never fully admitting responsibility. For Nelson Mandela, who built his reputation on reconciliation, justice, and forgiveness, Winnie's actions were irreconcilable with his vision of a new South Africa. He could forgive his jailers, but he could not forgive the bloodshed associated with his wife's name. Then, as South Africa transitioned into democracy, Nelson Mandela's political vision differed sharply with Winnie's. While Nelson Mandela sought peace, dialogue, and reconciliation with the white minority, Winnie leaned towards radicalism, often calling for violent resistance and openly criticizing the negotiations that Mandela was painstakingly leading. In 1994, Nelson Mandela became South Africa's first democratic president, and to acknowledge her role in the struggle, he appointed Winnie as Deputy Minister of Arts and Culture. But within a year, she was dismissed following allegations of corruption and insubordination. By then, their marriage was collapsing in public view. In 1996, Mandela filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. Their 38-year-old marriage ended in court, with Nelson Mandela delivering a somber testimony that their relationship had broken beyond repair. Even after the divorce, Mandela remained respectful in public, never attacking Winnie directly. But privately, those close to him knew he could not forgive her ex-wife for her infidelity, for the violence she presided over, and for the way she had damaged the Mandela name. Even at family functions, the two often avoided each other. Winnie even skipped his 75th birthday celebration, and their estrangement was clear. Meanwhile, on July 18, 1998 in Johannesburg, Nelson Mandela got married to Graça Machel. Graça is the only woman in modern history to have served as First Lady for two countries, South Africa and Mozambique. She is the widow of former President of Mozambique, Samora Machel, who died in a plane crash in 1986. We will cover her interesting story in the coming weeks. Please stay tuned to Hispu Media by subscribing and on the bell notification so you will not miss this story. Meanwhile, when this marriage happened, it was seen not only as a new love story, but as a final closing of his chapter with Winnie. For the rest of his life, Mandela carried his silence about her. Unlike his public gesture of forgiveness towards his oppressors, he never reconciled with Winnie in any meaningful way. When asked about her, he remained diplomatic, but the absence of warmth told its own clear story. Winnie Mandela remained a polarizing figure until her death on April 2, 2018. To many South Africans, especially in townships, she was a fearless warrior who never compromised. But to others, she was reckless, authoritarian, and tainted by violence. In the end, Nelson Mandela forgave a nation that jailed him for 27 years, but did not forgive his ex-wife, Winnie Madikizela Mandela. For Nelson Mandela, the hardest wound was not inflicted by prison bars, but by the woman he once loved. And it was the one wound he never forgave till his death on December 5, 2013. Notwithstanding, history remembers both of them as the two giants of South Africa's struggle for freedom. Click here to watch the story of the assassination of Chris Hani, another South African revolutionary who paid with his life in 1993. For other interesting stories on our channel, click here. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Hispu Media if you have not done so already. And I'll see you in the next video. Thank you very much for watching. Peace.